You have been sitting for hours. Your spine has been compressed under 900 to 1400 newtons, 30 to 100% more than standing, since the moment you sat down this morning. The pelvis tilted posteriorly, the lumbar curve flattened, and the compressive load on the lower lumbar discs exceeded what standing produces by a margin most people find difficult to believe. Every hour at a desk compresses the spine more than every hour on your feet. Lying on a hard floor drops that force to 250 newtons within seconds, a third of standing, a fifth of sitting. The numbers come from a researcher who measured them by inserting a pressure transducer directly into a living intervertebral disc in 1964. Nakamson, whose data remains the foundation of spinal loading research 6 decades later. The spine in a supine position on a rigid surface is as close to unloaded as the human body gets while still on Earth. Transition from sitting to lying on a hard floor is the single largest compression reduction available without leaving the planet. And the floor does something the bed cannot, because the surface matters as much as the position. Hard surface first, because the difference between floor and mattress is the difference between information and accommodation. A mattress deforms around the body. It creates a mold that follows your contours, distributing pressure based on body weight. The heaviest spots, pelvis, shoulders, sink deepest. The lightest spots, lower back, neck, are supported least. The result, uneven spinal alignment that may perpetuate postural asymmetries rather than correct them. A hard floor does not deform. The body must conform to the surface. The contact is uniform across the entire posterior surface, from occiput to calves. Every pressure-sensing mechanoreceptor along the posterior body surface is activated simultaneously by the same magnitude of pressure. Somatosensory cortex receives a complete body map. Every square centimeter of the posterior surface reporting the same input: flat, uniform, stable. This uniform proprioceptive input is what the floor provides that the mattress cannot. Beds provide comfort. Floors provide information. The somatosensory cortex uses the uniform contact surface as a calibration reference, comparing the body's actual position against the absolute reference of a flat surface. Muscle tension asymmetries become palpable: the left shoulder that sits higher than the right, the pelvis that rotates slightly, the lumbar region that does not contact the floor evenly. The floor reveals what the mattress accommodates. Scapular position against the floor provides immediate feedback about a postural change that desk work produces silently over decades. In neutral alignment, both shoulder blades should rest flat against the floor with equal contact pressure. In the protracted, internally rotated shoulder position that typing and screen use produce, the scapulae wing outward. One or both shoulder blades lift off the floor surface, producing a gap between the medial scapular border and the surface that you can feel. The gap is the postural deficit measured in millimeters of lost contact. As the floor's sustained pressure releases the pectorals and anterior deltoids that have shortened into the protracted position, the scapulae gradually settle toward the surface. The gap closes minute by minute as the shortened anterior muscles yield to the passive load. The viewer who lies down and cannot feel both shoulder blades flat against the floor has identified the protraction pattern. The viewer who lies down for 5 minutes and feels them settle closer has experienced the beginning of the correction. First 2 minutes on a hard floor feel like a diagnostic. The body's asymmetries present themselves through the discomfort of uneven contact. A shoulder blade that presses harder than the other, a hip that rolls, a lumbar arch that either bridges off the surface or presses flat against it. These are not problems the floor is creating, they are problems the floor is exposing. Problems that soft surfaces have been absorbing and hiding for years. Suboccipital muscles next. Because there is a mechanism at the top of the spine that nobody mentions and that produces immediate, recognizable relief. When lying on a hard floor without a pillow, the occiput, the base of the skull, contacts the surface directly. The suboccipital muscles, rectus capitis posterior major and minor, obliquus capitis superior and inferior, are the most densely proprioceptive muscles in the human body. More muscle spindle receptors per gram of tissue than any other muscle group. These 4 small muscles at the base of the skull are chronically contracted in every person who looks at a screen. they fire continuously to stabilize the head in the forward position that desk work and phone use demand. Years of sustained contraction without release. Hard floor provides direct pressure into these muscles that no pillow or mattress replicates. The rigid surface compresses the occipital attachment points, and the muscles release their chronic tension under the sustained pressure. The viewer who lies on a hard floor and feels their neck let go after 2 minutes is experiencing suboccipital release from direct occipital contact. These muscles are implicated in cervicogenic headache and tension headache. The steps discussion described how forward head posture multiplies the load on the cervical spine by a factor of 3 to 4. The suboccipital muscles absorb a disproportionate share of that load because they are the final stabilizers between the skull and the atlas vertebra. The afternoon headache that arrives after hours of screen work and resolves after lying on the floor for 5 minutes may be suboccipital tension, releasing under direct pressure, a resolution that a soft pillow cannot provide because the pillow deforms around the occiput instead of pressing into the muscle attachments. And then, the discs, because the floor provides a decompression window during the day that would otherwise not arrive until bedtime. Walking discussion described how intervertebral discs receive nutrition through imbibition, the rhythmic loading and unloading that walking provides, drawing fluid in and pushing waste out. The floor provides a different service, sustained unloading. When the compressive load the opening described has been running continuously for 8 hours, the discs have lost fluid steadily through the vertebral end plates. By 3 in the afternoon, they will not be unloaded again until 10 or 11 at night when you lie down to sleep. 5 minutes on the floor at 3 in the afternoon reduces the compressive load to 250 newtons. The osmotic rehydration the discs undergo when compression is removed begins the moment the body contacts the floor. The rehydration is partial. 5 minutes provides less recovery than 8 hours of sleep, but the timing matters. The disc that was being squeezed for 8 continuous hours receives a midday recovery window that would otherwise not occur for another 6 to 8 hours. The floor requires no grip strength and no overhead range of motion. It is accessible to anyone who can lie down. You now know what the surface reveals, what the skull releases, and what the discs recover. The question changes from what the floor does above and between the vertebrae to what it does to the muscle that has been pulling on the lumbar spine from below. Psoas next, the muscle that chair sitting shortened and that the floor lengthens through the simplest possible position. The psoas major, the deep hip flexor connecting the lumbar spine to the femur, is chronically shortened by chair sitting. In a seated position, the psoas is held at its shortened length for 8 to 10 hours per day. Over years, the muscle remodels to this shortened position. Collagen crosslinks form between the fascial layers, and the sarcomeres adapt by reducing their number in series. The shortened psoas becomes the new resting length. Lying supine on the floor with legs extended places the hip at 0 degrees of flexion, the position where the psoas is at its maximum length. The chronically shortened muscle receives a passive stretch under the weight of the extended leg resting on the floor. The stretch is sustained for the duration of the supine position. 5 minutes of passive loading at the length the psoas has not been held at since you last lay flat on a firm surface. Significance. The psoas attaches directly to the lumbar vertebrae, the transverse processes and vertebral bodies of every lumbar vertebra from L1 through L5. A chronically shortened psoas pulls the lumbar spine into excessive lordosis, compressing the posterior elements, facet joints, lamina, spinous processes, and contributing to the lower back pain that affects 80% of adults by 60. The floor position simultaneously decompresses the lumbar discs from above, reduced axial load from the supine position, and lengthens the supine position and lengthens the psoas from below. Hip extension passively stretching the muscle off the lumbar vertebrae. 2 mechanisms addressing 2 contributors to lumbar pain through a single passive position. Psoas release follows a specific timeline. During the first minute, the muscle resists. The shortened tissue and the fascial crosslinks maintain the shortened length against the passive stretch. During minutes 2 and 3, the muscle begins yielding. The viscoelastic properties of the fascial layers allow gradual elongation under the sustained load. By minute 4, the release is palpable. The lumbar spine settles closer to the floor as the psoas lengthens and reduces its anterior pull on the vertebrae. The viewer who lies on a hard floor and notices that their lower back feels different after 5 minutes is observing the psoas release, changing the mechanical relationship between the hip flexor and the lumbar spine. And then, the autonomic shift, because the horizontal position on a stable surface produces a measurable parasympathetic transition through multiple inputs simultaneously. Lying supine redistributes blood volume centrally. The baroreceptors at the carotid sinus detect the increased pressure from the central blood shift and trigger vagal output that slows heart rate and reduces blood pressure. The postural muscles that maintain upright posture, the anti-gravity muscles of the back, the legs, the core, deactivate completely. The metabolic cost of maintaining posture drops to near zero. The sympathetic motor output that drives these muscles quiets. Uniform proprioceptive input from the hard floor surface provides a stable, predictable sensory environment that the nervous system reads as low threat. No shifting surfaces, no balance demands, no unexpected inputs. Heart rate decreases, respiratory rate decreases, muscle tone decreases across all remaining postural muscles. For anyone who has been sitting at a desk in moderate sympathetic activation for hours, forward posture, shallow breathing, sustained cognitive effort, 5 minutes on the floor is a complete autonomic reset. Breathing on the floor reveals a mechanical relationship between the surface and the diaphragm that no seated or mattress position replicates. In an upright seated position, the abdominal organs press downward and forward under gravity, the thoracic spine rounds, and the diaphragm operates in a mechanically disadvantaged position, shortened, compressed, generating less excursion per contraction. On a firm floor, the supine position allows the abdominal organs to settle posteriorly under gravity, pressing against the posterior abdominal wall rather than down against the posterior abdominal wall, rather than down against the pelvic floor. The diaphragm is unloaded from the organ weight and can descend fully during inhalation. The deepest, most complete diaphragmatic excursion the respiratory system produces in any common position. Rigid surface adds a proprioceptive dimension to each breath that a mattress absorbs. When the diaphragm descends during inhalation, the lower ribs expand laterally and the lumbar spine presses slightly into the floor. The floor provides tactile feedback of that expansion. You can feel the breath moving, the rib cage against the surface, feel the lumbar spine responding to the respiratory cycle, feel the posterior rib expansion that seated and standing breathing do not produce because the back has no contact reference. The feedback teaches the breathing pattern the diaphragm was designed to produce: wide, low, posterior as well as anterior, a pattern that desk-based breathing has narrowed to the anterior chest over years of forward flexed posture. Sacroiliac joints, the two joints connecting the sacrum to the iliac bones of the pelvis, receive symmetric loading on a flat, rigid surface that no seated position provides. Chairs load the pelvis asymmetrically through the sit bones, one side bearing more weight depending on which leg is crossed, which direction the body leans, which pocket contains the wallet. Over years, the asymmetric loading can produce sacroiliac dysfunction, one joint compressed, the other gapped, the sacrum rotated slightly within the pelvic ring. The floor loads both iliac crests, both ischial tuberosities, and the entire posterior sacral surface with uniform pressure simultaneously. The symmetric loading allows the sacroiliac ligaments to settle into their neutral position, a passive correction that no amount of movement can provide because movement, by definition, loads one side differently from the other. Temperature differential between the floor and the body produces a subtle physiological effect that is easy to overlook. A hard floor, tile, concrete, hardwood, is typically 15 to 20 degrees Celsius cooler than body surface temperature. The posterior skin surface loses heat through conduction to the cooler floor, activating thermoreceptors that feed into the vagal pathway, a mild thermal stimulus sufficient to enhance the parasympathetic shift without triggering the vasoconstrictor response that full cold immersion produces. Autonomic dimension explains why the floor feels restorative in a way that sitting in a chair does not. Sitting maintains the anti-gravity muscles at partial activation, keeps the sympathetic system engaged for postural control, and provides an unstable surface that the proprioceptive system must continuously monitor. The floor eliminates all three demands simultaneously. Cultural evidence explains why this works as a lifestyle practice rather than an exercise. Japanese and Korean traditions preserved floor-based living long after Western furniture eliminated it. Eating at low tables, sleeping on futons placed on tatami or ondol floors, sitting in siya or cross-legged positions. These cultures maintain the daily transitions between floor and standing that Western chair culture abandoned. The epidemiological observation that hip fracture rates in Japan were historically lower than in Western populations has multiple contributing factors, but the preservation of deep squat and floor-sitting movements throughout the lifespan. Movements that maintain hip joint range, quadriceps strength, and the balance required for the transition itself is among the plausible contributors. The body that transitions between floor and standing multiple times daily maintains the functional capacity that the body dependent on chairs progressively loses. Post-exercise floor lying deserves specific mention because the timing amplifies every mechanism. After a run, a walk, or a strength session, the muscles are warm, the cardiovascular system is active, the metabolic waste products from exercise are circulating, and the autonomic system is in its exercise-driven sympathetic state. Lying on a hard floor immediately after exercise provides the parasympathetic transition at the exact moment the body needs to shift from exertion to recovery. The disc decompression arrives when the discs are most compressed from the exercise loading. The psoas lengthening arrives when the hip flexors are warmest and most responsive to stretch. The suboccipital release arrives when the neck muscles are most fatigued from maintaining head position during the workout. 5 minutes of post-exercise floor lying is the highest yield timing for every mechanism described above because each system is at its most receptive, compressed, shortened, contracted, and sympathetically activated, and the floor addresses all five simultaneously. Well, why every mechanism described above matters more after 45 because 4 age-related changes compound the floor's value with each decade. Disc proteoglycan content declines after 40. The rehydration capacity diminishes with the molecules that drive it. The discs that need rehydration most are the discs least able to pull water back in. The overnight recovery that fully restored disc height at 25 becomes incomplete at 55. The morning height is slightly less than it was a decade ago because the discs no longer fully rehydrate in 8 hours. A midday decompression window becomes proportionally more important as the overnight window becomes less effective. Hip flexor shortening accumulates across every year of chair sitting. The cross-links that formed in the fascial layers around the shortened psoas become denser and more resistant to lengthening with age. The lumbar lordosis the shortened psoas produces deepens, increasing facet joint compression, narrowing the spinal canal, contributing to the lower back pain you have been managing with stretches that address the wrong muscle. Suboccipital muscles that screen use has been contracting for decades have remodeled to their shortened state. The chronic tension at the base of the skull produces the baseline headache and neck stiffness you accept as normal. Background noise that has been present so long it no longer registers as a problem until the floor removes it and you realize how much tension was there by feeling its absence. The autonomic system becomes increasingly sympathetic. Dominant with age, baseline heart rate variability decreases, cortisol rhythms flatten, parasympathetic recovery slows. The horizontal parasympathetic reset that 5 minutes on the floor provides addresses the autonomic drift that the aging nervous system increasingly fails to self-correct during seated rest. Floor also becomes harder to reach, and the difficulty is the evidence. The hips that resist the deep flexion required to lower yourself to the ground have shortened hip flexors. The knees that complain during the descent have been deprived of end-range loading. The balance that feels uncertain during the transition has been unchallenged by soft, stable furniture for decades. Getting to the floor and getting up from the floor is itself a functional capacity that predicts independence and survival. The ability to sit on the floor and rise without using hands, knees, or forearms as support correlates with all-cause mortality in adults over 50, as De Brito and colleagues documented in the European Journal of Preventive Cardiology across more than 2,000 adults followed for 6 years. Each hand, knee, or forearm used for support during a sit-rise test subtracts a point from a maximum of 10. Participants who scored below 8 had 2 to 5 times higher mortality than those who scored 10. The test measures musculoskeletal fitness, balance, motor coordination, and flexibility simultaneously, a composite of the physical capacities that determine whether you can function independently after 70 or whether you depend on furniture and handrails to navigate your own home. The floor is both the intervention and the diagnostic. Using the floor daily, lying down, getting up, repeating the transition, trains the exact movement pattern. The mortality test measures. The viewer who avoids the floor because the transition is uncomfortable is avoiding the training that would make the transition easier and the test score higher. The discomfort is the signal that the capacity is declining, and the floor is the surface that reverses the decline through the practice of the movement itself. Watch a 2-year-old. They spend most of their waking hours on the floor, lying, rolling, sitting, crawling, standing, dropping back down. The transitions between floor and standing happen dozens of times per hour, without thought, effort, or planning. The hip joints cycle through their complete range. The quadriceps load and unload through full depth. The balance system processes continuous postural challenges. The spine flexes, extends, rotates, and decompresses constantly. At some point, typically between ages 5 and 10, as school desks and chairs replace floor play, the floor disappears from the daily repertoire. The transitions stop, the deep squat is abandoned, the hip range narrows. The balance challenge is reduced to the flat, predictable surface of shoes on level ground. By 30, most adults have not sat on the floor voluntarily in years. By 50, many cannot. That test, sitting down and standing up without support, predicting mortality more reliably than most clinical measurements, is the score I started tracking once the floor became a daily practice rather than an occasional surface. Decline that the sit-rise test measures at 60 began not with aging, but with the removal of the surface. Decades earlier, that maintained the capacities the test assesses. That convergence, 5 mechanisms operating simultaneously in a single passive position, each one addressing a deficit that the chair produced and the mattress perpetuated, is why 3 in the afternoon finds me on the floor instead of in the chair, 5 minutes of nothing undoing, 8 hours of everything the desk produced. Lie on your back on a hard floor, carpet on concrete, wood, tile. A thin yoga mat for comfort if needed. The pressure distribution remains essentially uniform. Legs extended, arms at sides or on the abdomen. 5 minutes. 2 variations change the physics significantly and serve different purposes. Legs extended, the default position, maximizes the psoas stretch because hip flexion is at 0 degrees. This is the position for psoas lengthening, full spinal decompression, and posterior body mapping against the surface. Knees bent with feet flat on the floor, the constructive rest position flattens the lumbar spine against the surface, eliminating the lordotic arch and producing the most complete lumbar disc decompression available in any position. The bent knee position is better for anyone whose lumbar lordosis is so pronounced that the extended leg position produces discomfort. The shortened psoas pulling the lumbar spine into an arch that bridges off the surface and loads the facet joints rather than decompressing them. Starting with knees bent allows the lumbar spine to settle flat against the surface before gradually extending one leg at a time as the psoas begins to yield. Distinction between floor lying and stretching deserves explicit naming. Stretching is active. You take a position, you hold it, you engage with the tissue resistance, you are performing an exercise. Floor lying is passive. You assume a position and do nothing. Gravity, body weight, and the rigid surface do the work. The psoas stretches because the leg weight pulls it to its full length. The suboccipital muscles release because the floor presses into them. The discs rehydrate because the compression is removed. The autonomic system shifts because the postural demand disappears. No effort is required. The intervention is the absence of effort. Lying still on a surface that provides the mechanical inputs the body needs and the proprioceptive feedback that soft surfaces absorb. The viewer who lies on the floor and feels the urge to stretch, to move, to do something, is encountering the unfamiliarity of a position that works through stillness rather than through movement. The stillness is the intervention. First minute feels wrong. The body is accustomed to the soft deformation of chairs and mattresses and resists the flat contact. By minute 2, the suboccipital muscles begin releasing and the neck lets go. By minute 3, the proprioceptive map has stabilized and the autonomic shift is underway. By minute 4, the psoas has begun yielding and the lumbar spine settles closer to the surface. By minute 5, the disc rehydration is in progress and the body is lying in a position it was designed to rest in. A position that furniture replaced, that mattresses softened, that you have not visited since lying on the grass as a child. Spine that carried 1,400 newtons for 8 hours of desk work drops to a fraction of that the moment the body contacts the floor. 5 minutes, a floor, and the surface the body was designed to rest on before furniture taught it to rest on something soft. The asymmetries revealed and the skull muscles released by the rigid surface, the discs recovering, the psoas lengthening, the autonomic system resetting through combined inputs that no chair, no mattress, and no amount of sitting provides.